So welcome to episode or class number 3 of Unapologetic. Now, normally I go about this a little bit differently when I teach classes. I normally start off with this lesson, but I wanted, because the church is new to my teaching, I wanted to take 2 weeks originally first to just kind of walk through and lay some other groundwork first. So that's why we didn't start here. But, so you'll see lesson 1 up on my slides at some point, but it's fine. So what this is today, now last week we were talking about realism, the physical versus non-physical. We got very, we've been technical a couple weeks in a row. This, guys, you guys will be happy, is actually one you can kind of turn your brain off a little bit for, okay? This is very pragmatic and very practical. The idea is, how do you set the stage when talking to somebody? So, okay, I actually had an interesting conversation with my coworker. I told you guys the other day, I have a coworker who literally said, well, man, I believe in everything. I'm like, everything? He's like, everything. And then I responded simply with, that's a lot of boxes to keep checked off there, my friend, because again, they're all religions that contradict, right? So we'll talk about that some other time, but I was able to exercise some of this stuff yesterday, okay? And I was actually reminding myself yesterday, when he started talking to me about religion, he's like, Will, why do evangelicals disagree with homosexual marriage? And I was like, oh, yeah, let's not ask me a controversial question at all. So then right when that happened, I was like, think of your lesson tomorrow, Will. Think of your lesson tomorrow. So it was really funny. But all right. So we're setting the stage on how you have a conversation that is difficult with somebody. Actually, and Kristen, right? Okay, Kristen. Okay. You're reading the book Tactics, right? Have you started it? You both are. I said Allison. I said your sister Allison, and you said Kristen. I wasn't talking about you. I was right. So before the class, I was like, so Allison, I was like, is Allison going to say Kristen? I'm like, I could have swore that her name was Allison, though. I was talking, okay, all right, we're good now. I was right, but then I thought I was wrong, but now I'm right again. And I prefer being right over wrong. So Allison, I could have sworn that was what it was. Anyway, you're reading the book, right? Tactics. So this is, no worries. So this actually, I pull from that book for this lesson. So just so you're all aware, if you want more of this sort of thing, you can order the books, like $10. Allison, I almost said Kristen now because you messed me up. Allison is reading it right now. But you can literally get it on Amazon for like $10. So, all right. So I'm going to skip past some of these parts because we already covered these. Like I said, this is usually episode or lesson 1 for me when I teach. We already defined apologetics, but as a defense of the faith, we use 1 Peter 3:15 as our theme verse. 1 Peter 2:15 also says, for this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. So arguing is a virtue, right? It is virtuous to argue. It's just, are you good at it? And are you making people really, really not want to talk to you? So there's a simple thing. So you have to ask yourself, guys, in a difficult conversation, what is your goal when we're doing apologetics? So, all right, next week, I'm going to start talking about revelation and how God communicates to man. And next week is where we're going to get that rubber meeting the road. We've set all the foundations up to this point, okay? And then we're just going to start jumping in, and it'll be a lot of fun, okay? I promise it's fun. I imagine some of you guys keep coming back, so I think some of you are having fun. That, or you just like to make fun of me. But what is your goal? So, is it to answer questions? Is it to prove a point? Is it to defend the faith? Is it to learn more about God? Is it to be maybe a more effective witness? Or is it to attack bad ideologies? So, when you are jumping into a conversation with somebody, you need to be asking yourself, what's my goal here? And sometimes it depends on the person, right? What is my goal? Because these should all be your goal, right? This should all be something that you're aiming toward. Now, for everyone who came in, I'm going to try to end class early today because I am running a service at another church. So, all right, just so you guys know, so I'm doing this and I'm zipping out. Pastor Travis Hughesby, he asked me to speak for him. So I'm having to take care of that after this. So you first ask yourself, what is the goal? And then hopefully it's one of those. And then you have to maybe adjust with the person you're talking to. The other thing I want to mention is that there are 2 types of people. I mentioned this in week 1, but I want to review. There are 2 types of people. There's agreeable people, and people who are agreeable, they these people are people-oriented, and they typically like to get along with people, and confrontation makes them uncomfortable. How many of you guys would consider yourself agreeable people? Imagine my surprise. Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, and okay, so you prefer to get along with people. Confrontation makes you uncomfortable. You're agreeable. You like to you're the guy when everyone starts fighting that goes, can't we all just get along, right? So then there's disagreeable people. These people are goal-oriented. And it doesn't care if they get along with people and are very comfortable or even revel in confrontation. How many of you guys would say you're disagreeable? You guys are my people, okay? I am excruciatingly disagreeable. I never used to be that way, but over time, I became that way. I became a monster. That's what I'm trying to tell you, okay? And this is true. I will all the time, when people argue with me, I'm like, yeah, I get what you're saying. Because like, well, what about this? What about, in this situation, okay, let's use abortion, right? Well, what about the mother who's in poverty? What about the single mother? What about the rape victim? And I'm like, but is it still a human being? I'm like, emotionalism, goal. How do we define a human being, right? And that's me. And other people, it's like, I know agreeable people, as soon as they hear those other objections, they clam up because they're like, oh, and their heart goes out to them. And here's the thing. Neither one is bad, okay? Just learn your weaknesses. As a disagreeable person, I have to be careful not to be a bulldozer. It is my natural instinct to just be like, all right, you want to go, bro? You're not ready. And to just run them over. And then I forget the person behind the question. And then the agreeable people forget the question behind the person. They will compromise maybe the principle for the person, right? So just know your weakness, know your tendency, and lean into your strength, but also be very aware of your weaknesses and try not to fall into them, okay? It's okay. Dr. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about agreeable and disagreeable people. Although, fun fact, disagreeable people make more money at work. Because they're just like, no, I deserve a raise. Because agreeable people, that's the idea of going to ask for a raise, terrifies you, doesn't it? Like, oh, I can't go ask for a raise. Like, hey, man, I need more money. Like, that's confrontational. Disagreeable people are like, I know what I'm worth and I'm going to go ask for more money. So it's fun fact, statistically, they've shown that. So no matter what your goal, never forget the person by which you're speaking to is an image bearer of God. This is something I can't emphasize enough. We are created in the image of God. Genesis 1 makes this very clear. It's called the Imago Dei, being in the image of God. And no matter what you're dealing with, remember, the person is an image bearer of God. This is where I think we can all agree the fact that a lot of Christians have mishandled the LGBT people because they don't treat them like people sometimes. They treat them like scum of the earth. They're image bearers of God as well. They're just deeply entrenched in sin. And they need rescue and grace the same as we do. So it also, you think of it, or think about the person who disagrees with you entirely politically. How many of you guys are involved in politics? Nobody. Wow, nobody pays attention to the culture. Okay, we're going to have to talk. No, just do not become obsessed with politics, but it's good to be educated. But you talk to somebody who disagrees with you, and it might get frustrating. Remember, image bearer of God, image bearer of God. When you want to strangle them, image bearer of God. Okay? And then the other thing is only seek to destroy the idea while doing your best to keep the individual's dignity intact. In other words, don't try to rip their ego to shreds. The point is to dismantle bad ideas. So you have to attack the philosophy, not the person. This can look differently. For example, you disagree with somebody, and I could be, Julius, you lived with me, so I'll use you as my example. I could be like, Julius, you know what your problem is? The problem is that you deny objective truth, blah, 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 blah. And you need to get your act together. That sounds like a personal attack, right? I might be right. He might be denying objective truth. He might be doing those different things. But because I'm attacking him, now he's going to instantly get defensive. So he's not going to listen to a darn word I say. He's instantly going to, walls up, we're not talking anymore. So in order to keep things objective and a healthy conversation, I want to only attack the idea. Let's say he goes, well, there is no truth. And I'm like, yeah, Julius, that's actually a lot of people think that. I can validate that he's not alone. And then go, the issue is with that, not with you. Notice that. The issue is with that is just if we don't know that objective truth exists, then is that statement true itself? And then and notice how that's not attacking the person. It's attacking the idea. Also, if you guys practice this in your marriages are healthier. Well, honey, the issue is with that, I think XYZ. It's good relational advice. This is practical for no matter what disagreement you have, okay? So the question is, when you're going into a conversation with somebody, are you going to war or are you going to the negotiations table? Because both are ways of handling foreign threats, right? If we're dealing with that idea. Follow with me. But we have to remember, the enemy is bad philosophies, incoherent thoughts, and ultimately Satan the deceiver. That's the enemy, not the person, okay? He might hold on to bad ideologies, so that's why we need to equip ourselves to attack that. There will also be times when you have to swing hard, and other times you'll need to learn to negotiate and be kind. Learning to tell the difference, though, can take some time. There are certain people, I will go in, I'll kick in the door when necessary and just shut the whole situation down. Other times, and the majority of the time, that's not necessary. So you disagreeable people, I'm talking to you. You don't always have to go to war, okay? Yeah, you're smiling. I know. I see you because same. You don't always have to go to war. It is good, though, to have people who are willing to, though, right? So the question, of course, well, do arguments even work? We touched on this a couple weeks ago, but like I said, this is kind of a brief review over the course of what we're doing. So the first thing that comes to mind with Christians is that arguments are even biblical, but we see in Acts chapter 17 that Paul does reason with them, doesn't he? He uses arguments to get people to be convinced of Jesus Christ. The entire book of Hebrews is literally geared toward Jewish people to go, Jesus is Messiah, and here's all my arguments as to why. It was actually designed as an hour-long lecture or sermon. And it's funny because then I run into Christians who just will say, well, can't we just preach the gospel and love each other? I'm like, no. The Bible has, Stephen, before he got stoned, consider that, right? Before Paul gets called on scene. What was it that he did? He gets in front of all the Jews and he goes, here's your history of being a stiff-necked, rebellious people, and you killed the Messiah. What do you have to say for yourself? Like, we'll kill you. So he makes an argument, right? So Acts 17:17 is probably one of the verses that we will pull from a lot. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons and in the marketplace and every day with those who happened to be there. So not only are arguments biblical, but they are necessary. Many people are converted due to good argumentation, and the problem is many people do not know how to reason their beliefs or properly defend their faith. We've talked about that enough in here, right? And I know you guys probably just get to the point. Why haven't we talked about that? Next week we're starting, okay? So we are not in this alone. Greg Koukl says, yes, each of us has an important role to play, but all the pressure is on the Lord. Sharing the gospel is our task, but salvation is God's responsibility. So we have to remember, because that's the other thing, is sometimes we try to, I'm going to argue you into the kingdom of heaven. Okay, look, as a disagreeable person, I'm with you. I want to. But you oftentimes have to remember that salvation is God's responsibility. My sharing it is mine. Also, you have to understand that some people choose even to, there's actually been polls that show that atheists have even said that if we prove that Christianity was true and that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, atheists, by and large, over 60% of them did say that they would still not worship God. So it comes down to not a truth issue. It comes down to an emotional issue and a choice, ultimately, usually. So even though you might be equipped with the best arguments on planet Earth, you have to remember, if their heart is hardened, you're going to be having an uphill battle, okay? And sometimes it means becoming their friend and really being patient with them, okay? Get a bit of that pastor's heart in you. So what I want to talk about with setting the stage is the Columbo tactic. How many of you guys know collective detective Columbo? Yep. He's that guy. He's always got a cigar in his mouth. He's a man's man detective, right? From an old TV show. And so the Columbo tactic is simple. What did Columbo do? He asked questions. So a modest goal here is just to put a pebble in the shoe. How many of you guys have ever had a pebble in the shoe? Isn't it the most annoying thing ever? Like you're walking like, man, it's just a little pebble, but you're just like, but you got to get where you got to go. So you're like limping and like kicking your foot, trying to get it out of there, right? The idea is maybe you don't have time to sit down and have a 6-hour dissertation with somebody. That's cool. maybe your goal is to put a little intellectual pebble in their shoe. Okay? Just a little inconvenience intellectually. Just a little boop. Just to throw out, just to ruin their day a little bit. Just to be that annoying little thing that gnaws at them, okay? You might not always have time, like I said, to have a 3-hour discussion, but you can cause a small intellectual inconvenience. And one thing we have to understand is one sows and another reaps. And oftentimes sowing takes a very, very, very long time. Very few times do you just walk in, you're just reaping and reaping and reaping, right? That doesn't happen. It usually takes time. So you have to understand when you're doing this stuff, do what you can to sow the seed. Maybe I'm sowing the seed so somebody else can reap it. Have that mentality a little bit when you go about it. Like, well, I didn't get them anywhere. Do you know how many stories you hear of people who don't convert to about 30 or 40? And it's because over time, one thing after another thing. You could be one of those links in that chain. And I talked to Kara Johnson, teenager, really messed me up when she said this. And it kept gnawing at me for like 3 years. And then so-and-so comes along, right? Those things can happen. And I've seen those things happen. And it's actually a lot of fun when you hear the stories. And you might not even know that ever happened. There are people who impacted my life that they probably to this day don't even know they impacted my life. It's just the reality. Actually, I know there's people who don't know me who have impacted my life. One of them that I made sure I did hunt down was an old church friend of mine because my family was so broken. Every time I went to their house, Jeff Randall was the best dad I've ever seen in my life. Hard worker, lots of fun, very adventurous family, godly and anchored. And every time I went there, I felt like a breath of fresh air as a kid. And I was always so excited about going to the Randalls because Jeff Randall's the man. And then it wasn't until 2 years ago, I finally was like, I got to look up Jeff Randall on Facebook. Finally found him, sent him a thank you message saying, I don't think you realize as an 8-year-old kid how much your family meant to me. And he was like, wow. He's like, I didn't even know. And oftentimes we wait till people die to share how we really feel about them. Point is, guys, you could be a part in the chain and you don't even know it. So do what you can to sow seed. And then understand that, of course, do what you can to reap the grain. Okay? I'm not saying don't. Just do what you can for either direction. Okay? So how do you navigate tough conversations? And again, guys, I'm going to be burning through this because I have to run a service after this. So running around. But before entering a conversation, one must first have a game plan. So that's the idea here. You might not know a lot, right? Some of you guys might be beginning little apologists, little budding apologists, and I have no idea, but I really want to engage. Cool, that's fine. You might not know a lot, but you still feel the need to challenge something, and that's okay because we are all learning. And it's important that you learn how to stay in control of the conversation then, especially if you don't know as much, and you don't know as much. Stay in control of the conversation. Anyone who's been in sales knows how to do this. But remember, it's just a conversation. You're not on trial. So just relax. A lot of times, as soon as it gets disagreeable, we're like, we start getting all freaked out and worried about the situation. It's not a trial. Relax. Okay? It's just a conversation. So we're going to talk about the Columbo tactic here. How many of you guys have ever seen the anime? I doubt any of you have. Death Note. My people. Okay. So there's a character. So there's a guy who's killing a bunch of people. And there's a character who's mysteriously known as L. And he's a detective trying to hunt down this guy who's killing people. That's the brief way I'll put this. It's a mystery anime. And L, the reason why he's so good at his job is the same reason why Columbo's so good at his job. He asks questions. And the questions that nobody else will ask. The questions that are obvious, yet nobody wants to ask them because sometimes they even seem absurd. And that's what you guys are going to do. You're going to first gain information, then you're going to reverse the burden of proof, and then you're going to make your point. That is your 3-point outline and how you're going to navigate difficult conversations from here on out. Because if you do this, it'll make you actually a force to reckon with, even though you might not know as much as you want to. It's okay. Again, we're all learning. Hopefully you guys will get all that information, but this is a good game plan. Step 1, you're going to get information from the person you're talking to. Then you're going to reverse the burden of proof on them, make them prove their point, and then you will make a point. Let's see how this works. So step 1, whoever asks the questions remains in control of the conversation, right? How many of you guys have been in an argument? They just keep asking questions. You get really frustrated because they're in control. Whoever asks questions remains in control. So when they make a statement, your next objective is to simply ask a question. And notice you don't even have to argue. You just have to ask a question. So after hearing a statement you disagree with, simply ask a question, okay? Asking questions protects you from being accused of twisting their words and allows you to have a conversation that is clear in its definitions as well, okay? I believe this. What do you mean by that? Okay? Let them define their terms. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. And one of my favorite questions to ask, if I could give you enough evidence to the contrary, would you change your mind? That's an aggressive question, but it's an honest one, isn't it? Right? And you're forcing the conversation to become open and honest, as it should be. So, well, yeah. And at that point, when they're like, no, like what's funny is I've never had anyone say no. I've never had anyone say no because they want to because if you ask it, hey, well, if I gave you enough evidence to the contrary, would you change your mind? Well, of course I would. Perfect. Because they're so confident in their position, right? But if they say no, then, no, then I'm like, okay, then I don't see the point of having a conversation, because if we don't care about evidence at all, then right now we just have opinions and there's no point in having this conversation. And then just don't waste your time. If someone says no, it shuts it down, fine, cool. But most people have a faux confidence. So questions. What do you mean by blank? Simple. John hit me with a good one that I don't have in here. Help me understand. Notice how non-confrontational that is. You agreeable people should definitely hold on to that one. Those who are agreeable, help me understand. I'm trying. I don't want to fight you. Okay? But a disagreeable person would probably prefer, what do you mean by that? Right? How exactly does that work? This keeps you from speaking past each other and prevents you from also misrepresenting them. But also, notice who's the one doing the talking. It's not you. Okay? Reverse the burden of proof. Whoever makes the claim is stuck with the burden of proof. It's an old debate tactic. For example, I don't believe God exists. What do you mean by that? Oh, I just don't believe there's any evidence for God at all. I'm like, really? Explain to me how that works. Now notice how they made the claim, now they have to back it up. Suddenly they might just realize that, oh, well, because there's evil and suffering in the world, I don't believe a loving God would create evil and suffering, so nah. Well, is that all you've ever really thought about? Is just that? Have you ever heard that there are actually good objections to answer your question? And notice how it's just questions, but they got all the burden of proof. It can be very frustrating for them, but also it can be eye-opening. This is essentially asking them to substantiate their beliefs, and many people have put very little rigorous thought into their thoughts. This is the reality. Especially nowadays when everything's an echo chamber and all the things are just repeated, the bumper sticker slogans, people just latch onto them without thinking about them. Because sometimes it makes sense on a surface level. There's a difference between an opinion, though, and an argument. So this makes them have to argue their opinion. What do you think about abortion? I think, my body, my choice. What do you mean by that? Well, it's my body, and I can choose what I want to do with it. How does that work when it has a separate DNA? Well, I believe blah, 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 blah. Now they have their opinion, but they might not know how to substantiate it at all. See? So that's the idea. Yeah, and also understand when you're in that situation and they just make a statement, ask yourself, did they make an argument? Did they make a case or something? Or did they just state an opinion? I oftentimes will tell people when I'm engaged in a debate, I'm like, yeah, but that's just a statement. That's not an argument. And then they're like, what? And this is, you should see it because people are so used to making statements as if they're arguments. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Like I could say the earth is shaped like a donut. No, it's shaped like a donut. You're wrong. That's a statement. That's an opinion. A bad one. But that's not an argument. And that's what you'll end up having is a lot of people screeching opinions at you. So notice step one sets them up for this. The whole point is step one, ask the question. Step two, reversing the burden of proof. Okay? Make them substantiate their beliefs. So questions for step two would be, what made you reach that conclusion? So how does that work? I don't believe God exists. What do you mean by that? Well, I believe, so I'm an atheist. What do you mean by that? I don't believe God exists. What made you reach that conclusion? Have you noticed that you're still in control of the conversation and you're not a threat? Okay. So top 3 to follow up with in step 2. Is it possible, which is able to be done? Is it plausible, which is within reason? Or is it probable, likely to be the case? I say all the time, just because naturalistic evolution is possible, does that mean it is plausible and does not mean that it is probable? Big difference between possible and probable, right? Anyone who does statistics and crime studies knows this. Well, just because it's possible that people do this, the probability of that with this implemented is low, right? So these are great questions to keep in your pocket for step 2. What made you reach that conclusion? And then these right here. And again, this helps you navigate that difficult conversation, even if you might not know much about the subject matter. Because that's another thing. You don't know everything. You can't know everything. So your best bet is to first play it safe, unless you do know what you're talking about. There's nothing worse than someone who speaks with all the confidence and bluster of the 1,000 suns, but knows very little, right? So ask yourself, did he give me an opinion or make an argument? And then use your question to make a point. This is fun. Ladies, you might be better at this than men. My wife's not even here for that joke, man. So this also means you have to know your target, right? You have to know who you're talking to. So while the conversation is ongoing and you're asking questions, identify certain points that might stick out to you, or where you have more knowledge and are more comfortable with, right? So you might say a lot of stuff. Have you ever noticed that certain people just say a lot of things? And I had that yesterday with my coworker who kept talking about religion. He moved to so many different things, from ancient cultures to how do you know a book is real, to how can you say it's this one God, to how can you know, and there were so many things he hit on. I was like, ting, 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 ting. And I was like, there's a dozen things there that each deserve an hour. And so then what you might have to do is like, okay, I can't talk about all those, but one thing that sticks out to me is this, and just pick one that you're comfortable with. Okay. It doesn't, again, pebble in the shoe. Okay. Pebble in the shoe. So, questions to make a point. Soften the blow by beginning with a question. And this is the pastoral side. Most pastors are very, very good at this. Pastor John, I know you are because I've seen you do it. I'm giving the secrets of the trade and I apologize. Have you ever considered? Is that not just all you agreeable people kind of sigh? You're like, oh, it's actually, have you ever considered this? It makes you come off like their friend. Instead of, you're wrong and you're ignorant and you should be ashamed of yourself and there's dishonor on you, dishonor on your family, dishonor on your cow, right? Like, it's way better than that. So have you ever considered, can you clear this up for me? Notice how now, if you ask, can you clear this up for me? You're making them the expert, but you might have a really good question that's going to expose the problem. This is all new information to me. Maybe you can help clear this up. But what about this? What if it's this somebody who, I don't know everyone's Genesis view here, and honestly, I don't care about how the age of the dirt. It's not one of my passions. Okay, I just don't care. But I do know that a lot of Christians do. And I'm not saying you're wrong for caring. I'm just saying that's not my particular field of interest, if that makes sense. How many of you guys would identify as young earth creationists? Okay, all right, good majority of the class. Okay. What if you're talking to somebody who's a geologist who has a lot of random information of studies that you've never heard before, to be able to respond to that in your young earth creation view? Well, you might be able to argue the things that you know, or you can just go, this is all new information for me. Can you help clear this up? What about this? Okay, I don't know that field that you just mentioned. I know nothing about that. So I'm going to put this in your field, but I'm also going to bring up an objection and make you the expert in the room. See? And it's funny because actually it usually feeds the ego a little bit. At the same time, your questions can really trip them up. So anyway, the point is there. And by the way, just so you all know, I do tend to be on the young earth side. I just say I don't care to study that as much as everybody else. Because for me, I have a lot of other arguments I think that work better for God's existence. And I just don't want to fight like years of different beliefs and teachings somewhere else. I'm like, yeah, we'll approach that at another time. Okay. Let's get to the cause of all that stuff first. So here's an example, a fun example of this. Christians are judgmental. How many of you guys have heard that? Okay. What do you mean by that? Step 1, Him. Christians are always telling people how to live their lives. Her. How does that work exactly? Him. By going around slamming their Bibles and telling people what to think. We should all just love one on each other. Love on each other. Sorry, I can't speak. We should all just love on each other. Her. Making her point. Haven't you ever considered, there's step 3, that telling people to love on each other is telling people how to live their lives? Who gets to decide who's right and who's wrong? Bam! I am the politest person that'll slap you in the face. Right? So notice how that there, you agreeable people probably are like, oh, that's a helpful way to navigate. You disagreeable people are like, oh, that's probably a good way not to bulldoze somebody. Thank goodness. I've been trying to figure this out for years. So, and then the great escape before we close. Sometimes conversations get dicey and can get heated or bring new information to light, and it can be hard to get out of the hot seat, especially if you're in there like, all right, I got this. And then they bring up new information. You're like, oh, crap, I don't know how to respond to that. So here's a few tactics for you. Let me think on it, which is way better than saying I don't know, right? It's way better. I don't know. Let me think on that. Again, remain in control of the frame. Remain in control of the frame. Or this one. So, by the way, this allows you to do your research when the pressure is off, right? Let me think on that. You're going to go home, you're going to research that. You're going to get some good answers. That's okay. Or you can just cater to their ego a little bit. Sounds like you know more about this than I do. So could you slow down and help me understand? And you don't always have to agree with them either. You just let them explain their position. You go, huh. And then guess what? You go home and you do some research. See if there's any good responses to their position. Yeah, I know. Thank you. I'm almost done, so I'm going to wing it. So you're inviting a more aggressive person to do what he wanted to do in the first place with this question, which is taking the pressure off yourself, and he wanted to bulldoze you in the first place. So if they're just belligerent, just say that. Let them do their thing. They wanted to bulldoze your ego anyway. Who cares? Keep your ego out of it. It's fine. Let them do what they want and walk away. So that is literally the end. So does that make sense, though? Does those steps make sense on just how to navigate tough conversations? And as you get more familiar with material and as you get more comfortable with it, you might be able to implement more aggressive tactics that do work, but start here, okay? This is just what we call wisdom and discretion, because we don't want to bulldoze people or make them disgusted with Christians. We want them to go, that Christian made a good point. So go talk to them more about this stuff. So next week, we are jumping into how God communicates with us. We're going to discuss general revelation, and we will, because of general revelation in Romans 1 and 2 that it talks about, we will be talking about the fate of the unsaved a little bit in the next couple weeks. Or those who just might not know, we'll discuss that. It might be a fun back and forth discussion. And then right after we talk about general revelation, I'm going to get into like the main philosophical arguments I use for God's existence. And then after that, we'll jump into more stuff on how Scripture's inspired and things like that, okay? We're just going to work our way through these things slowly but surely. So with that being said, thank you guys for coming here. Let's close in a word of prayer. Dear Lord and Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, God. Thank you for His church. Lord, thank you so much for the ministry here and the people and just the body of Christ that resides here. Lord, I pray that as we go forward, that we become passionate about the gospel. But Lord, I pray that you'll help us be the salt of the earth and to actually impact people's lives for the gospel of Christ, giving a strong apologetic, but not just in word, but also in deed. Lord, I pray that as we go forward, that we will be a beacon to our community. And Lord, as us, help us that you would equip us further. We ask you all these things in your holy and precious name. Amen.